By the time Gabrielle let Taylor get close, it was already too late to call it harmless. The only question was how far they could go before one of them stopped it. On Wednesday, I saw Gabrielle Delaney across a crowded foundation lunch and had the immediate, deeply adult urge to clear the room. Not metaphorically. Physically. There are moments in life when a woman should recognize that her emotional state has become disproportionate to the facts. This was one of them. I knew that. I respected it in theory. In practice, I was standing near a table full of trustees, watching Gabi laugh at something one of the city partners had said, and thinking the kind of thoughts that should come with legal supervision. It had been 4 nights since the sidewalk. 4 nights since she had stood in damp streetlight and told me that if I kissed her, she would make a decision she wasn't ready to make. There are many things I enjoy being accused of. Making a woman want me too much is one of them. The trouble was, for the first time in years, I had not walked away from a charged moment feeling triumphant. I had walked away hungry. Hungry in the frustrating, complicated sense. Not just for her body, though obviously that had become an issue. Hungry for the thing beneath it. The trust in her voice when it finally softened. The intelligence in the way she refused me. The terrible, exhilarating fact that she had not been telling me no. She had been telling me not yet. That distinction had ruined several otherwise productive mornings. Wednesday's lunch was being held in one of our smaller event rooms upstairs, the kind with polished wood paneling, tasteful floral arrangements, and a row of windows framing the city as if New York itself had agreed to be decor. 20 people, maybe. Foundation staff, board members, a few cultural partners, 2 city representatives, and 1 donor who used the phrase community synergy before noon and should probably have been denied cutlery on principle. I arrived on time, which was not a moral achievement so much as a tactical necessity. Gabi was already there. Of course she was. She stood near the windows with a notebook in one hand, speaking to a museum director while sunlight moved across the line of her jaw. Today she wore deep blue, something between slate and midnight, with her hair pulled back in a low twist that exposed the clean length of her neck in a way I found offensively distracting. Minimal jewelry. No visible effort. A woman who could walk into a room full of people like me and still somehow look untouched by performance. My body, which had become embarrassingly opinionated where Gabi was concerned, noticed her before any more useful part of me could intervene. She looked up almost at once. That was becoming its own problem too. Our eyes met across the room. No smile. No obvious acknowledgement. Just a steady look, a pause, and the smallest change in her expression as she took me in. Then she glanced, once, to the side. To the navy silk at my waist. To the open line of my collar. And back up again. Barely a second. It should not have felt as intimate as it did. Naomi, seated at the near end of the table with the air of a woman who had come primarily to observe my decline, followed my gaze and sighed softly. Oh, this is going well. I slid into the chair beside her. I haven't spoken. No, Naomi said. But you're both already behaving like a private argument in public. I reached for the water glass in front of me. That seems fanciful. It seems visible. I glanced toward the far side of the room again. Gabi was no longer looking at me. That irritated me immediately. Naomi smiled into her coffee. You have exactly the emotional maturity I expected. I'm being perfectly calm. You're plotting how to sit closer. That was offensive only because it was true. The room settled. People took their seats. By some quiet act of cruelty or destiny, Gabrielle ended up directly across from me at the long table, 2 chairs down, which meant I could see her without appearing to seek it and hear her without needing to turn my head. I had never hated architecture more. The meeting began with ordinary things. Funding allocations. Quarterly priorities. A discussion about local engagement metrics that could have killed weaker women where they sat. I contributed elegantly. Asked precise questions. Redirected one donor away from sounding paternalistic and another away from sounding stupid, which is exhausting work, but someone must do it. All the while, I was acutely aware of Gabi. The way she uncapped her pen with one hand. The way she listened without performing attention. The way she never once looked at me when I said something clever, as if refusing to reward me in public for what she had already recognized in private. At one point, the museum director next to her made an ill-considered comment about scaling smaller cultural partners without compromising aesthetic quality. Before I could intervene, Gabi set down her pen and said, in that calm level voice of hers, I think what you mean is without flattening them into something wealthier people find easier to recognize. Silence. Not scandalized. Just startled. I leaned back slightly in my chair and watched the color rise in the man's face. She was beautiful in the most inconvenient way. The director recovered with a cough. That's not exactly what I intended. No, Gabi said. But it is usually what happens. I should have defended him. Or softened it. Or guided the room smoothly onward as I so often do. Instead, I smiled into my water and thought, there you are. Later, when the discussion moved toward donor-facing messaging, she made a point about not confusing access with welcome, and I almost laughed aloud. Because the universe does enjoy a sense of humor. Because that line could just as easily have been about me. Because she knew I would hear it. When the lunch finally ended, people rose in the usual loose clusters of handshakes, polite summaries, and logistical lies. I stayed where I was for a moment, collecting my papers without any particular urgency. Gabi was halfway to the door when she turned back. Taylor, she said. Just that. My name in that tone from across the table. The room ceased to deserve my attention. I stood. Gabrielle. Naomi, beside me, muttered, Jesus. I ignored her. Gabi came around the far side of the table and stopped close enough that I could see the faintest pulse at the base of her throat. Not nervous. Not comfortable. Something much better. You were quiet, she said. I was listening. That sounds suspicious. You've made me ambitious. Her eyes held mine for a beat too long. That line is becoming a problem. So am I, according to Naomi. Naomi appears very well informed. She has made my flaws a private hobby. Gabi's mouth moved. I'm starting to understand the appeal. Of her. Of being difficult for you. I laughed softly. Cruel. Accurate. There was movement all around us. People leaving, glasses being cleared, someone calling to a colleague near the door. But the air between us felt separate from all of it, narrowed to something close and specific. Walk with me, I asked. Not a command. Not come here. Just that. Something in her face changed, very slightly at the difference. Then she nodded. We stepped out into the corridor together. The 17th floor at that hour was quieter, most of the executive traffic already redistributed back into offices and conference rooms. Sunlight fell in clean bands through the glass, turning the polished floor into a series of bright interruptions. We walked side by side without touching, which was beginning to feel less like restraint and more like a private form of violence. You disapprove of 3 people in that room, I said. Only 3. Perhaps 4. But I was giving you room to surprise me. I don't disapprove, she said. I just dislike when rich institutions talk about communities as if they invented need 5 minutes ago. I told you I liked your mind. You also told me you didn't like seeing me with David. Both things can be true. Her glance slid toward me. You really don't separate anything neatly, do you? No, I said. That's for people with less interesting lives. That sounds like a defense. It usually is. We reached the windows at the end of the corridor. The city spread beneath us in hard light and reflected glass, all ambition and weather. Gabi stopped there, one hand slipping into the pocket of her jacket, and looked out for a second before speaking. I was thinking about what you said on Saturday. That interested me more than was appropriate for a weekday hallway. Which part? The part where you said you were trying to want me without using all the ways you usually get what you want. I leaned lightly against the glass wall beside her. And I haven't decided whether I believe you. That seems fair. She looked at me then. Do you? The question went straight through the decorative layer of my mood and landed somewhere unpleasantly honest. Not entirely, I admitted. Gabi didn't move. That was one of the things about her. She had a rare gift for letting truth arrive without hurrying to comfort it. I know how I am, I said after a moment. I know what I'm good at. I know how often people mistake being seen by me for being understood by me. Her expression didn't soften exactly. It sharpened in a different way. And which is this? I held her gaze. That's what I'm trying to figure out before I do something reckless. A breath passed between us. Then Gabi said quietly, You already are. I should have been insulted. Instead, heat moved through me, so quickly it almost felt young. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my bag. I ignored it. Then buzzed again. Naomi. Naturally. I glanced down at the screen and back at Gabi. If I tell her we're in a hallway having an honest conversation, she may actually assent. Gabby laughed under her breath. Not a polite social laugh. A real one. Low and surprised. There are sounds that belong in private spaces. Her real laughter was one of them. That was when I realized I was lost in a much less manageable way than I had initially believed. And if you're listening from somewhere other than Manhattan, tell me where. I always want to know who's here. And if you're enjoying this story, like the video and subscribe. It matters more than people think. The platform is much kinder to channels people actually choose to support, and Naomi would be unbearable if I failed to mention it. That evening, Naomi came to my apartment carrying sushi and judgment. I assumed one or both might be necessary, she said, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. Which one is the tuna? You'll know by the smell. I took 2 plates from the cabinet. You're in a dangerous mood. You had a hallway conversation. Naomi slipped out of her coat and walked straight to the wine. Mara told me you left a board follow-up unread for 40 minutes. I paused. Mara reports to you now? She reports to common sense. That's offensive. It's efficient. We sat at the kitchen island, city light falling in through the windows, the room warm with evening and too quiet for the state of my head. Naomi reached for her glass. So, how bad? I took a piece of tuna I didn't particularly want. She asked whether I believed myself. Naomi smiled slowly. And I told her the truth. Which one? That I'm not sure yet. Naomi actually went still at that. Taylor. I looked at her. That, she said, may be the first remotely responsible thing you've done since this started. I was too tired to be charming about it. I don't know what I'm doing. Naomi's expression softened in a way she reserved for very few people and almost no circumstances. No, you do. That's the problem. I set down my chopsticks. Meaning you know exactly how to create desire. You know how to pace attention. How to say the right thing at the right moment. How to make a woman feel singular. Naomi swirled her wine once. You don't know what to do when you actually want to risk being ordinary. That word again. Ordinary. I looked out at the skyline instead of at her. I was ordinary on Saturday. Naomi made a face. You walked 3 blocks and wore sleeves. Let's not overstate the suffering. That earned her a short laugh. She leaned one elbow on the counter. Do you want my actual advice? That depends how cruel it is. Cruel enough to be useful. She took a sip. Stop trying to steer every moment toward chemistry. I said nothing. Naomi watched my face. You think the chemistry is the point because chemistry is where you're strongest. It isn't the point with her. Not anymore. I looked down at the stem of my glass. Naomi continued, quieter now. What if the thing she needs is not to be dazzled? What if she needs to see what you're like when there's no room to impress? The apartment had gone very still. There are things people say to you because they think they sound wise. And there are things the right people say because they know where your weaknesses live. I hated that I understood her immediately. She wants to trust the person under the effect, Naomi said. And if I'm not sure she'll like that person? Naomi's gaze held mine, steady and unamused. Taylor, you know what your problem is. I assume you'll tell me even if I don't ask. You're used to being unforgettable. Her voice softened. You have almost no practice being known. That line stayed with me. It stayed while Naomi left and the apartment quieted around me. It stayed while I stood in my bedroom deciding whether a woman could be haunted by her own friend's accuracy and still deserve nice sheets. It stayed while I woke at 2 and then again at 4 and finally gave up and sat in the dark with a glass of water and the humiliating awareness that I missed a woman I had still not touched. By Friday, things had worsened beautifully. I was in the lobby of the foundation wing after a late afternoon donor review when I saw Gabi kneeling beside an open crate, helping one of the exhibition teams unpack frame materials for an upcoming installation. Sleeves rolled. Hair looser than usual. Reading glasses back on. One knee pressed to the floor. Concentrating. I stopped walking. A junior finance analyst nearly collided with me and apologized as if she'd struck a cathedral. I waved her on without taking my eyes off Gabi. It is difficult to explain to people who have not lived like me how rare it is to be taken off guard by desire in its simplest form. Not spectacle. Not seduction. Not someone dressed for conquest. Just a woman doing her work, focused and self-contained and unaware, for one impossible second of being watched. I should have left. Instead, I crossed the lobby. Tell me, I said as I came up beside her, is this beneath your job description or are you making a point? Gabby looked up. There was a flash of surprise, then amusement, then something warmer that she didn't quite hide in time. I could ask you the same thing. I glanced at the framed materials. I'm absolutely beneath manual labor. I come from money. That explains the shoes. I looked down at them. These are excellent shoes. They are completely impractical shoes. Sometimes beauty requires sacrifice. Yes, she said, standing now and dusting her hands lightly together. Usually from other people. I laughed. The exhibition assistant beside her murmured something about needing more mounting strips and disappeared with suspicious urgency. We were alone in the wide marble lobby, the late light turning the glass doors to honey. What are you doing this weekend? I asked. Gabby tilted her head slightly. That sounds dangerously like a setup. It may be an invitation. To what? I considered lying. Or polishing. Or packaging the moment in something more impressive. Instead I said, there's an apartment. She blinked once. That sounds vague enough to be illegal. My mother has an apartment in Brooklyn she only remembers when she wants to host impossible people near Prospect Park. I leaned one shoulder against the crate. She's out of town. I occasionally borrow it when I need to feel like someone less expected. Gabby was quiet for a second. You're inviting me to borrowed real estate, she said at last. Yes. That is somehow either your worst move or your best. Naomi says I need to stop relying on polished surroundings. Naomi is becoming my favorite unseen influence. That's hurtful. Gabby's mouth curved. What would we be doing there? I held her eyes. Talking. And. Depends how much trouble you're in the mood to cause. Her expression changed just enough to make my body entirely unhelpful. That answer, she said, is exactly why you're dangerous. Only if you come. Taylor. I waited. There are moments with her when the whole interaction seems to narrow to a filament. One question, one answer, one breath held too long. This was one of them. Then she said quietly, tomorrow. Late afternoon. I did not smile too fast. This was growth. Tomorrow, I repeated. And if this turns out to be an ambush involving white orchids and hidden staffing, I'm leaving. I'm wounded you think so little of me. I think exactly enough of you. That line followed me all the way home. Saturday arrived with cold spring light and a city washed clean by morning rain. I drove to Brooklyn alone. No driver. No black car waiting outside. No assistant anticipating timing. No one who might transform a private afternoon into something that smelled even faintly of theater. The apartment sat on the top floor of an old brownstone my mother had bought years ago because the light in the front room reminded her of Paris, which is the kind of sentence you grow up around when your family has always had money and no shame about taste. It was smaller than mine, older, softer, less curated. Books on the shelves. Linen curtains. A piano no one had played in months. A kitchen that actually looked used. In some ways, it felt more intimate than my real home because it had none of the architecture of power in it. It looked like a place where a person might accidentally be honest. I arrived early enough to resent myself for it. I opened windows, closed them, rearranged nothing, then caught myself and laughed aloud because apparently I was now the sort of woman who could be made nervous by lighting. At Fort Welve, Naomi called. I'm checking whether you've set anything on fire. Not yet. How many candles? 2. Acceptable. Naomi. Yes. I looked out at the trees lining the street below. What if this goes badly? Her voice shifted instantly. Do you mean badly in the way you usually mean it, where someone leaves wanting more and you feel vaguely sad in beautiful surroundings? Or badly in the way where you actually care? The second. Naomi was silent for half a breath. Then good. That's not a comforting answer. No, she said. It's the useful one. Stop trying to manage the outcome. Just don't lie to her. Then she hung up, which is one of the many reasons I love her and occasionally wish minor inconveniences upon her. At 4:31, the buzzer sounded. I let Gabi in. There are women who improve in evening light. Gabi improved in threshold moments. She stood in the hallway outside the apartment in a dark coat over cream knit, hair loose, one hand in her pocket, looking not dramatic but exquisitely specific to the hour, as if the entire afternoon had, without warning, become about the fact of her arrival. Brooklyn, she said as she stepped inside. How humble. Don't mock my restraint. It's expensive. Her gaze moved over the apartment, taking in the bookshelves, the old wood floors, the soft beige sofa, the piano near the window. Something in her face loosened. "This feels less like you," she said. I closed the door behind her. "That may be why I chose it." Gabby set her bag down on the chair near the entryway and turned slowly once, taking in the room with the kind of attention she gives places she thinks might matter. "Your mother's?" she asked. "Yes. And you come here when you want to feel like someone else." "Sometimes." I leaned against the doorframe. "Or like someone before the performance." She looked at me then, properly. "That's more honest than you usually are on a first invitation." "It isn't a first invitation. You've already turned down several more dangerous ones." That got a small smile from her. I offered her wine. She said yes. We moved through the apartment carefully at first, like people testing the floorboards of something potentially fragile. I opened a bottle in the kitchen while she stood by the shelves in the sitting room, reading the spines of the books as if they might contain a version of me I had not yet made available. When I handed her the glass, our fingers brushed. Tiny contact. Totally survivable. My body filed for appeal. We sat on the sofa with a little more space between us than the room required. Light moved slowly across the floor. Somewhere below, a child shouted in the street and then left. The city was present here, but softened. Less performance. More life. For a while, we did what Naomi had told me to do. We did not steer the moment toward chemistry. We talked. About her parents. About my mother's impossible standards and my father's quiet loyalty. About the oddities of class. The hidden codes. The embarrassing assumptions. The ways wealth trains some people to expect softness and trains others to distrust it. Gabby told me about internships where everyone else already knew which fork belonged where, and she went home afterward and learned manners from watching old films out of pure irritation. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my wine. "You're laughing," she said. "That's a terrible sign." "I'm charmed." "That's not what I was going for." "No," I said. "That's why it's working." Later, when the light had thinned and the room had gone amber, she drifted toward the piano. "Do you play?" she asked. "Badly." "That's new." "I contain multitudes," I said. "You've used that already." "Because it's excellent." Gabby ran 2 fingers over the closed lid of the piano. "My mother taught for years," she said. "Not professionally. Just children. Mostly neighborhood kids." She said piano is a good way to tell who's been praised too early. I smiled. "That sounds merciless." "It was useful." "And what did she say about you?" Gabby looked back at me. "That I tried too hard to get things right before I understood how to feel them." That quieted something in me. Because I understood it instantly. Because it was not, in fact, about piano. I set my glass down on the table. And now I know that getting them right and feeling them aren't the same. A pause. I just haven't decided which one is more dangerous. I moved closer without thinking. Not right against her. Close enough that the room altered around us. "Feeling them," I said. Gabi's eyes lifted to mine. "Of course you'd say that. Would you rather I lied?" No, her voice had gone lower. "That's what makes this difficult." We were standing in the amber quiet of a borrowed apartment, a piano between us and not between us. The city outside dimming toward evening. There should have been music. Or distance. Or witnesses. Instead, there was just the sound of our breathing and the knowledge that every sentence was taking us further from safety. "Tell me something true," I said. Gabi's brows lifted slightly. "That's an aggressive request." "I'm trying to be less decorative." Her mouth moved. "Dangerous goal." "One thing," I said. "Something real." She looked at me for a long moment, then past me, then back again. "When I left you on the sidewalk," she said quietly, "I got in a cab and spent 20 minutes staring at the door because I wasn't sure whether I'd just done something smart or something cowardly. The honesty of that hit me harder than anything more obviously seductive could have. I took one slow breath. "My turn?" I asked. Her eyes stayed on mine. "Your turn." When I got home, I said, I stood in my bedroom trying to decide whether the reason I hadn't kissed you was restraint or fear. Gabby did not move. "Which was it?" I held her gaze. "Both." Something passed between us then. Recognition, maybe. Relief. The terrible intimacy of finding exact language for the same wound. She looked down once, just once, at my mouth. I stepped closer. Still no touching. There was so much space left to cover, and almost none at all. "You see," she said softly. "This is what I mean." "What is?" "The way everything around you starts feeling like a setup, even when it isn't one." That almost made me laugh, because it was unfair and perfect and true enough to matter. I tilted my head slightly. And if this isn't? Gabi's breath changed. Then that may be worse. I should have said something light. Something to ease it. Something worthy of my reputation. Instead, I lifted my hand, slow enough that she could stop me, and touched one fingertip to the inside of her wrist. That was all. Nothing theatrical. Nothing overt. Just skin. Warm. Alive. The pulse there jumped under my finger. So did hers. Her eyes closed for half a second. When they opened again, the room had changed. That was the first moment I knew we were in trouble neither of us could narrate our way out of. I traced no further than that. Just the inside of her wrist, once. Then let my hand fall. Gabi swallowed. Taylor. Not a warning. Not quite permission. Something in between. Yes. She looked at me as though trying very hard to remain assembled. Don't do that thing you do. I smiled despite the state of my pulse. You'll have to be more specific. That wasn't charm. No. That wasn't performance. No. Her eyes dropped to my hand and back up. That was worse. A silence fell between us. Dense, electric, impossible to confuse with anything safer. The sort of silence in which whole futures briefly become physical suggestions. Then, because apparently I had lost every useful instinct except the honest ones, I said, "Come here." Her laugh came out almost soundless. That line again. Yes. It still sounds inevitable. Maybe I'm starting to mean it differently. That got her. I saw it happen. Something in her face unfastened. Not fully, just enough. Enough for me to know. Enough to make my own control feel like an expensive piece of jewelry I was no longer sure how to wear. Gabi took one step closer. Then another. We were breathing the same air now. No one had ever explained to me that anticipation could become its own form of contact. No one had needed to. I had usually moved too quickly to learn it. With her, every second lengthened. She looked at my mouth. I looked at hers. When I lifted my hand this time, it was to her jaw. Slowly. The soft line of it fitting into my palm as if my body had been arrogant enough to predict it. Gabi inhaled sharply. There are things the body admits before the mind is willing to file them. Tell me to stop, I said. Her eyes lifted to mine. Why now? Darker. You know I won't. That was all the permission the room was ever going to get. I kissed her, and immediately understood the extent of my earlier self-control, because the first touch of her mouth against mine felt less like a beginning and more like the clean collapse of something I had been standing inside too long. Gabi kissed like she meant things. That should not have been as devastating as it was. No games. No sampling. No coy little question marks of desire. There was restraint in her for the first half-second, then recognition, and then a low, helpless sound against my mouth that nearly ruined me on contact. My hand slid from her jaw to the back of her neck. Hers found my wrist, then my shoulder, then the front of my blouse in a grip that was not exactly cautious and not remotely casual. I kissed her again, slower, deeper, and the world narrowed to breath and warmth and the astonishing fact that she tasted like red wine in restraint and something much more dangerous than either. She backed up without deciding to. I followed without pretending otherwise. We reached the edge of the piano, then the wall just beyond it. Then she was there, one palm flat against the plaster, and I was kissing her like I had spent 2 weeks trying to stay articulate and had finally run out of language. Her fingers moved into my hair. That nearly ended the afternoon. There are touches that flatter, and there are touches that undo. That one undid. I kissed the corner of her mouth, the line of her jaw, the place just below her ear where her breath caught violently enough to satisfy every vindictive instinct I possessed. Taylor, she said again, and this time my name sounded less like a word than a fracture. I pulled back just enough to look at her. Her lips were parted, eyes half-lidded. Composure gone in exactly the way I had imagined, and, crucially, much worse. "You're trembling," I murmured. "So are you." I smiled. Observation noted. "God, you're..." She stopped because I kissed her again. There is a point in desire where intelligence becomes irrelevant. We were approaching it at speed. My hand slid down the line of her waist, found the curve of her hip, and drew her a fraction closer. She made a sound at that, small, involuntary, devastating, and I felt her hand tighten in my hair. Then somehow we were moving again. Not far. Just enough. From the wall to the sofa in that warm room with its linen curtains and old piano and fading light. I sat first, pulling her with me, and she came down across my lap with an almost angry grace that sent a violent, immediate pulse through my entire body. This was no longer elegant. Thank God. I kissed her throat, her collarbone, the edge of skin above the neckline of her sweater. My hands had found the small of her back and then higher, then lower again, learning her carefully and much too fast. Gabi's forehead dropped briefly to my shoulder, as if she needed the angle to survive what was happening. Still think I'm overreacting? I asked softly against her skin. Don't. She started, then stopped when my mouth found the place under her jaw again. Don't what? Don't sound amused when I can't think. That went through me like whiskey and fire. I leaned back just enough to look at her. Her hair was half loose now. Her mouth flushed. One hand braced against the back of the sofa, the other still at my shoulder as though she had forgotten it belonged elsewhere. You can't think. I repeated quietly. Not usefully. Interesting. Taylor. The warning in it was beautiful. I touched the side of her face with the back of my fingers, then let my hand slip lower, grazing the line of her throat, the center of her chest, slow enough that every inch of motion felt deliberate. Gabi's eyes closed. For 1 second, maybe 2, the world tipped towards something much more dangerous than kissing. My hand stopped where her breath changed most. Her hand came over mine. Not to push it away, just to stop it there. The room went silent except for our breathing. I looked at her. She opened her eyes. There are moments when a woman could say yes without words. This was one of them. There are also moments when she could be saying yes and no and please don't make me choose too quickly all at once. This was very much one of those. I lowered my mouth to hers again and kissed her once, slowly this time, giving her time to stop me and knowing I did not want her to. Instead, Gabi kissed me back harder. That nearly destroyed the last surviving piece of judgment in the room. My hand moved under the hem of her sweater before I had fully decided to. Warm skin. Sharp inhale. Her body arching closer with a lack of restraint that felt almost feral after all the carefulness between us. God, I said against her mouth. Yes, she breathed, and that was not helpful. Her hand slid down my back. Then lower. Then back up again as if she were trying not to take too much and failing beautifully. I kissed her until I could no longer remember what hour it was or whose apartment we were in, or whether it was possible to die of self-control in a room with decent bookshelves. And then, because the body is cruel and timing is vulgar, I felt the exact moment the afternoon crossed from dangerous into irreversible. I knew it because I stopped thinking in scenes and started thinking in outcomes. I knew it because my hands were no longer moving at random. I knew it because if I had stood up with her in my arms and carried her 10 steps down the hall, neither of us would have interrupted me. That was the problem. I pulled back first. Barely. Only enough to breathe. Gabi's eyes opened slowly, her hands still curved at the back of my neck, her whole body tense with the effort of stopping nowhere near where either of us wanted to stop. Tell me, I said, voice rougher than I liked, if this is where you want me to stop. She stared at me. And for the first time since I'd met her, I saw not caution, not resistance, not wit, but the full naked cost of wanting. It did something terrible to me. Her fingers trembled once against my skin. If we do this now, she whispered, I won't be able to pretend I'm still thinking clearly. The room held still around us. There it was. Not refusal. Not regret. Truth. I closed my eyes for half a second because I knew exactly what she meant and hated how much I respected it. When I looked at her again, she was still there in my lap, flushed and breathing hard and looking like the last decision a disciplined woman should make before dark. I touched my forehead briefly to hers. That, I said, is an exceptionally unfair thing to say while sitting on me. A broken sound escaped her. Half laugh. Half something else. You asked. I know. I kissed her once more. Not to restart it. To seal the stop before it shattered us. Then I let my hands fall to the line of her waist and kept them there, steady, because if I let myself wander even 1 inch higher or lower, I would lose the argument I was trying very hard to have with my own body. For a long moment neither of us moved. Then Gabi took a shaky breath and leaned back just enough to look at me properly. You're being very calm about this. I assure you, I said, I am not. That made her close her eyes again. When she opened them, there was something like apology there. And something like wonder. And, more dangerously than either, Trust still waiting to be earned. I should go, she said. The sentence hit me somewhere low and mean. Not because it was wrong. Because it was right. Yes, I said. Her brows lifted faintly, as if she had expected charm, resistance, persuasion. I nearly laughed. So did I. Instead, I eased her gently off my lap and stood with what dignity I could salvage. She smoothed her sweater. I adjusted nothing, because the truth was beyond tailoring at that point. We walked to the front of the apartment in silence. Not awkward silence. Not empty. The kind of silence that happens after a storm passes, so close you can still feel the air vibrating. At the door, Gabi picked up her bag and turned to me. I had kissed women goodbye 100 times. Never like this. Never with the distinct understanding that what mattered was not whether she wanted more. It was that she wanted more enough to leave before taking it. I'm not trying to punish you, she said quietly. I looked at her. I know. She exhaled, looked away once, then back at me. I need this to be something I can still stand inside after it happens. That sentence went through me with almost surgical precision. Because it was exactly the kind of thing no one had ever asked me for so plainly. Not a spectacle. Not seduction. Not intensity for intensity's sake. A future tense. I stepped closer, but only enough to touch the edge of her coat, straightening a fold that did not need straightening. When it happens, I said softly, I don't want you regretting the way we got there either. Her eyes searched my face for a long second. I let her. Then, very slowly, she leaned in and kissed me once. Brief. Precise. Worse than everything before. When she pulled back, my hands were flexing uselessly at my sides. This, she murmured, is becoming a problem. I smiled despite the state of my pulse. Only now. That almost got another laugh out of her. Almost. Then she opened the door and left me standing in amber light and absolute ruin. I did not move for a full minute. Then I picked up my phone and called Naomi. She answered on the second ring. How dead are you? I sat down on the arm of the sofa because my legs had briefly stopped inspiring confidence. She was on my lap. Naomi inhaled sharply, delighted. And then she said if we did this now, she wouldn't be able to pretend she was still thinking clearly. There was a beat of silence. Then Naomi said, very calmly, Oh, sweetheart. I hate that tone. You shouldn't. It means I'm right and you're doomed. I looked toward the darkening windows. Toward the piano. Toward the soft wreckage of the room. She left, I said. Yes. I let her. Naomi went quiet for a moment. Then softer, Good. That surprised me. Good. Yes, she said. Because if you had stopped her from leaving, you would have won something. This way, Taylor, you may actually end up with something. I closed my eyes. I hated that she was right. I hated even more that I understood why. By the time I locked the apartment and drove back into the city, evening had fully fallen. Brooklyn glowed behind me in the mirrors, softer than Manhattan, less polished, more intimate. My mouth still remembered hers. My hands still remembered exactly where they had almost gone. The worst part was not the frustration. It was the anticipation. The knowledge that whatever came next would not feel accidental anymore. She had not stopped because she didn't want me. She had stopped because she did. And now I had to decide whether I could want someone this badly without turning urgency into damage. That was a much less glamorous challenge than seduction. It was also, increasingly, the only one I cared about. So tell me in the comments, what got you most in part 3? The hallway tension? The Brooklyn apartment? That line about not being able to pretend she was still thinking clearly? And whose side are you on now? Taylor's or Gabi's? If you want part 4, like the video and subscribe so you don't miss it. Because from here, the restraint gets thinner, the stakes get messier, and someone is going to say something that changes everything.